I swear, officer, all these elves were naturally high. Hello, everyone. Bront CatHerder here, and we're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends. And we got another edition here of my series of DERP through Faction Wars. This time we're talking about the High Elves. And as I mentioned before, they are all naturally high, so don't worry about that. But what is derping through Faction Wars? Well, that is my method of completing Faction Wars through the method involving building damage dealers to deal damage to your enemies, bringing enhancers to buff you and debuff your enemies so you do more damage, revivers that help bring you back to life because you need to worry about dying if you're trying to 3-star the floors, and then protectors to help you from dying less often, I guess, as it were, to make sure that you are fully protected. So we're going to dive in, talk about the various levels, rares, epics, and legendaries, and then we'll talk about building a team. So we'll highlight some of the champions that can be very effective in Faction Wars. I might highlight a few of the places that they're useful outside of Faction Wars as well. So let's get into it. So the High Elves have a couple of good champions in here. Elhain is one of the starters, and all of these starters are naturally very good damage dealers because they're built to be so. They're built to be used in Arena. They're built to be used as campaign farmers. They can be used in various other content as well. That said, I don't know if Elhain is really a top tier damage dealer for Faction Wars 21, but if you've already 6-starred her, it's going to be difficult to take her out until you find somebody that does even more damage because she's a very good damage dealer. In fact, as far as just dealing pure damage, she's the best pure damage dealing champion from the starters in the game, although I still think Kale's a better starter. But there's a couple of other superstars here, actually. Eris is a superstar because Eris fits in the Myth Air teams, which are some unkillable clan boss teams that require Eris, or they require 2 other champions to replace her, really, to fully fill everything that Eris does. Eris does a decent amount of damage because she hits fairly hard, and she will counterattack once in between her turns when any of her allies are attacked as well. So you build her for a lot of damage. She's unfortunately a little squishy because she's a rare and she's a damage dealer, so that they tend to be a little squishy. But she also brings a full cleanse and a small increased speed on a 3-turn cooldown. Now, it's not the big version of increased speed, but increased speed is increased speed, and a cleanse on top of it is very, very helpful. So she's a very good champion. She can be in your Faction Wars 21 team if you need somebody to help. If you're not building her for the Myth Air team, there's a good chance you're probably not going to build her. But she's definitely good as a filler early on towards the end. And later on, you can certainly swap her out if you need to, or you build her up full if you're struggling to get some of the decent elves. Medicus is the only other champion that I'm looking in here that does any reasonable amount of damage. He's in Medicus or Prosecutor. They're okay. They do an okay amount of damage, but they're not great and probably just going to help you early on. So I wouldn't focus too much on them past the early game until you can get replacements. The 2 other people that are worth mentioning in here is you will hear a lot about Apothecary. Apothecary is one of the best speed champions in the game, at least very early on. He has a decent aura for dungeons, which is not going to help in Faction Wars, but he's good for a lot of dungeon content. But he also has a 3-turn increased speed with a 30% turn meter boost as well on the same skill. So it is a major speed boost. He's one of the best speed bumpers in the game. He's got a pretty decent speed for a rare. He can be used in arena. He can be used to help your dungeon teams. He's a very good champion overall. He's also got a pretty powerful heal and is the only heal that can actually critically hit. So not that I would advise building him with critical rate to be able to critical, but if he happens to get some additional crit rate from various other things, it's not bad because it helps him with that heal as well. And it's actually a pretty juicy heal. And then he's got a 3-hit A1. It's a random hit, so it's not particularly useful in a lot of content. It's very useful in Fire Knight, which is one of the reasons he's a really good Fire Knight champion. But overall, he's a great rare. He's actually one of the better rares in the game. He is well worth building. He's useful, as I've said, in Arena, especially early on. And in Faction Wars, he can be in your end game team easily. And then finally, Reliquary Tender is a rare reviver, one of the few rare revivers in the game. Obviously a void rare, so a little more difficult to attain, but still somewhat reasonable because there's not a lot of void rares either. She gives you some healing with a continuous heal. She also has a revive. It's not the best revive, but it is a revive. And you can get it on a decent cooldown. You can also get her cleanse on a decent cooldown, which is good. She's got a cleanse and a bit of a heal. So overall, you can book her down to very reasonable cleanse, some healing, and an occasional revive if you need the bailout revive. If you're lacking in some healing, she's a good build. She's also very good for the Nether Spider, for example, particularly early on when you're going to have to nuke the Nether Spider down. She can cleanse all those poisons off. So Reliquary Tender is a very good to build champion in general for the rares. She's also decent in rare secret rooms if you need a reviver. She can even help you in endgame faction wars if you're desperate for healing, if you want an extra reviver. But we'll get into that a little more later. High Elf Epics, there's quite a few here that are worth talking about. As far as damage is concerned, you've got Marksman that can actually hit pretty hard, but I don't like Marksman's kit overall, so if you need damage and you're desperate for it, he's not a bad champion to build, but he's not great. There's a couple of OG greats in here. Tyrell is still a good champion. He's been power crept a little bit in general content, but he still has a 2-turn decreased defense on a 4-turn cooldown that hits pretty hard. He's got an absolute nuke of an A3 that also does a stun for up to 2 turns and a turn meter drop. So it's a very, very powerful ability. Well worth building him for damage for. And he's got a 2-hit A1 that also does a decrease attack. He's very reliable in Clan Boss because of that A1 decrease attack. He's very reliable with the decreased defense because of 100%, although unfortunately it's a 4-turn cooldown, not a 3-turn cooldown like several newer champions. He's a defense-based champion, so he's very tanky naturally. And overall, he can do a decent amount of damage. He's not a top-tier damage dealer, and as far as the damage is concerned, he's probably been power crept a little bit over the course of the years, but he still is worth building for damage. And if you have him on your team, he's an absolute beast. Plus, as a defensive champion, he's super easy to keep alive with all of that damage, which makes him easy to build. He does need the accuracy to land his debuffs, but he lands several good debuffs enough that if you can't build him for damage and you just need the accuracy, you can do that as well. Well worth building, will help carry you through Faction Wars. Royal Guard's one of the other OGs. He's one of the original maximum HP champions. He's got an attack-based maximum HP AoE on his A2. He also has a 4-hitter A3 that hits randomly, so it's a little hard to use, but he brings some protection with turn meter decrease and a chance to land decreased speed. Very good champion overall. He even has a decreased defense on his A1. You build him for a decent amount of damage, and in fact, because he's got the max HP A2, you can build him with like an HP or a defense-based chest, so he can be a little bit tankier than a normal attack champion. It will impact his A1 damage and his A3 damage a bit, but he'll still do a decent amount of damage, and that maximum HP pit, especially against bosses, will be a big, big deal. Finally, as far as damage is concerned, Vergis is one of the other damage dealers he's got. I believe he's got an AoE. He hits fairly hard on his A1. Vergis is more of a protector than a damage dealer, though. He's certainly easy to build because, again, he's a defense-based champion. He brings some ally protection, some continuous heals, and some increased defense. And overall, he's a decent champion. He can solo the Scarab if you build him properly. He's got some decent uses. He's certainly fallen off. There's plenty of better champions out there, but overall, he's a decent protector, utility champion overall. Could definitely be helpful in Faction Wars. Scaramus, or Scaramus, that's how you pronounce that. Newer champion, I have not had a chance to use a lot of him, but he's got AoE provokes and stuns on his A1 and will counterattack. So he can help control the waves very well, and I think he does okay damage, but I didn't list him as a damage dealer, but he's a very good protector because of the control and provoking and stunning that he does, which is kind of cool. And Drycia is a fairly good protector. She's, many people call her a discount Necrit, where she will do an ally protection on one of your weaker champions passively, so she'll do it just by existing. She has to take a turn in order to do that, and she does it every 3 or 4 turns, but she will ally protect your weakest champion, and she brings some other protection abilities to mitigate damage on your squishiest champion possible. So she can be a very good protector for you. She's even useful in some mid-game arena. Neldor is another good champion. Neldor is actually a champion that's been released that's targeted towards hard Fire Knight, but he brings some increased speed, he brings some decreased speed, he brings some freezes. So that three in combination makes him a fairly solid protector. Ambassador Lethlin, who brings some provokes and AoE stuff as well. He also has an AoE A1. He's not the greatest champion from his kit, but an AoE A1 with a stun set is always a welcome addition to clearing waves in Faction Wars. So he's worth considering building just for that. He is also a fusion for Mikage, so you could certainly build him to 5-star 50, use him in Faction Wars, and then later on you would sacrifice him for Mikage. So not a waste of a champion in any way, shape, or term. Ethlin got an okay kit, some AoEs, can also be put in the stun set as well, because I believe they've got an AoE A1, does some provokes. It's an okay kit. Didn't thrill me as something that you have to use, but it seemed like it's something that could be useful to mention as a protector. And then finally, Battle Sage also has an AoE A1 with some decreased attack that can be very helpful as well. High Elves have a lot of really solid legendaries, not ones that necessarily stand out in a lot of content, but they're very good in general. So we're going to go over them all. I'm going to try to keep it fairly quick, but there's an awful lot of them to cover here. We have Elenarl, who can do some decent damage, although she is a poison exploder. She can do some poisons and an HP burn herself, but there's not a lot of poisons in this faction. So Elenarl can be a very useful champion. She is not going to be the best damage dealer in this faction, so still worth building, but probably necessarily not the best Faction Wars damage dealer. Islin can certainly do a little bit of damage, but is more of a protector with some decreased attack and provokes as well. He's got some okay Hydra utility as well. He's a fusion though, so you may have him, so he's not necessarily a bad build for that case. Specifically, if you're just looking for damage dealers first, which we usually cover, you've got Ethos, who is an amazing legendary damage dealer. He is great for farming Minotaur as well as Nightmare Campaign. He's good for wave clear. He can be used as a arena champion as well. Supreme Elaine is a little more well aimed at being an arena, but does well in waves as well. Both of them would be very useful to have on your Faction Wars team. Yenica is a free to access champion. She's got fragments you can buy in the clan shop. Well worth buying. If you don't have a damage dealer, you're struggling to get through Faction Wars, fuse her and she'll help give you enough damage to get through the faction. She keeps herself fairly well alive because she puts veils on herself. She has a lot of AoE. Very useful overall, very good champion. She's actually can be very useful in Hydra early on, and she can actually be useful in Arena early on too. So it's another good example of that. Rowanus and Royal Huntsman kind of lumped together. They're both decent damage dealing champions. Rowanus brings an AoE stun, so he's got some protection ability. Royal Huntsman brings some decreased defense and weaken. Alexander is basically a clone of Royal Huntsman to an extent. So if you have an Alexander, he's not bad. He's useful for damage. But if you don't have an Alexander, you're not going to pull him. He was one of the login champions after Ninja. He was an exclusive champion, has never come back. And honestly, he's not that great. So I would not invest a lot in him. But if you have him, he can do some damage. Deliana can be built to do some damage, but she also provides leech and some healing and some block debuff. So she's a bit more of a protector, but you can put her in a stun set. She'll be great. And it's easy to build her for damage because you build her for some HP, which is survivability, and she gets damage out of it as well. Tator is a great defensive champion for some damage, but also gives you a lot of protection with veils and shields and block debuffs as well. He can be very useful against the boss because the boss has a lot of control abilities, and his block debuffs will help you a lot. Valinor is a great damage dealer as well. He also provides a crit rate buff, so you can actually build champions with less crit rate. I usually don't like building teams based off of less crit rate, but it's an option, particularly for Faction Wars when you're struggling. It can make it easier to build some of your damage dealing champions that are not going to be used elsewhere. He also provides decreased defense and weaken, which is great. So he, as well as Royal Huntsman, very good for that. Probably the star of this faction, however, is the Arbiter. The champion that she greets you when you start the game. She is amazing. You can get her through the various quests. So do those quests. She's well worth getting. She's got an A2 that can strip debuffs and do some damage to an AoE, although it's only about a 50% chance. She's got an A1 that provides some weaken and a double hit. Not a big deal. But her A3 is a huge 30% turn meter boost with a juicy heal. And I cannot forget the increased attack that comes on her A3 as well. And then she has an A4 that can revive and turn meter boost. So it doesn't need to revive, but it certainly can. So she brings you a reviver, a healer, a turn meter booster, and a attack boosting champion all in one. She's great for arena. You're going to want to build her with high speed because she's very useful in arena for high speed, and that build generally will work fairly well in faction wars as well, and she can help carry your squad. Lysandra is another good speed champion. Lysandra does a increased turn meter, decreased turn meter on the enemy, and increased speed on you, as well as a 100% turn meter drop on her A2 against one target. Very, very good. Was one time noted as the Queen of Speed, and while she certainly has been power crept a little bit, she's a very useful champion in a lot of stuff, especially for progression early to mid game, and she's useful in teams like against the Dark Fae later on. Finally, we've got Lanatharl. Lanatharl can do a lot of damage. He's an AP champion. He throws some good shields out there as well, and he's got ally attack. So Lanatharl is a great champion to build. He's really good for hard Fire Knight. He'll keep you alive, provide a lot of damage, well worth building. The other champions I have not mentioned, Fina is the faction leader, I guess. She's really rare, so I would not worry about her too much. I keep forgetting about Athorian. Athorian is another good damage dealer who also provides decreased attack and block buffs and does a max HP hit as well, so he can be very useful against the boss and against the waves as well. Shiramani and Pixneal both bring some control and some freezes. Shiramani is a little bit better than Pixneal, but that's only because Pixneal requires 17 books. I wouldn't invest too much into either one of them. They're okay champions. Shiramani can be useful in a couple situations. Pixneal can be useful in a couple situations. And in fact, Pixneal is booked. She's a decent champion. But overall, they don't bring enough to the team to be worth the investment it makes to make them great for your team. So that is the Legendaries. Let's go take a look at the boss. So the Elves have gotten fairly lucky. They get the Yellow Boss. And the Yellow Boss is one of the easier bosses in the game. Does some freezing if you hit them, does some true fear, does some provoking, so you have to deal with a bunch of crowd control, but overall the boss doesn't hit too hard. The boss doesn't have any revival mechanics, doesn't have any weird swapping mechanics, doesn't have the ally attack stuff. Overall, it's a fairly straightforward boss fight, and you just have to worry about controls. And that's where champions that either bring cleansing or block debuffs can be very helpful. There's a couple of each in the faction, a couple of rares that actually fit that bill fairly well, so that's helpful. So overall, this boss mostly just bring enough damage and enough protection to make sure you survive. It might be nice to have a cleanser or two available. That's where like a reliquary tender can be very helpful. A Tetora is great for this as well because block debuffs makes this a lot easier as well. Plus he's got a decreased attack, so that's also very helpful. Heiress can be very helpful, especially if you've already built her for a clan boss team. Overall, Arbiter helps carry this pretty easy. Arbiter makes you do more damage and makes you do it faster, and doing more damage faster is a great way to speed through the boss. So overall, here's the recommendations. As you can see, there's a lot of different damage dealers. There's a lot of protectors. There seems to be an epidemic of not a lot of the enhancers, but the enhancers here are high quality enhancers. At least Tyrell is a high quality enhancer. Apothecary is a high quality enhancer. Heiress is fairly good. Arbiter, Lysandra, very good. Royal Huntsman is usable. Bellinor is actually very solid as well. So overall, lots of decent enhancers, and you can get away with just having an Arbiter and having a bunch of other damage and protection. And there's a lot of protection in this, so there's a lot of champions to choose from. My sample team down here below, Arbiter is a free-to-play, easy to get. Tyrell is an epic, hopefully easier to get. Apothecary is a rare, generally fairly easy to get, although rares can sometimes elude you as well. Heiress is a campaign farmable rare, so she's very easy to get and to fully book, so that's an easy option for you. She's not key, but this is just a sample team here. And then finally, a Royal Guard, which is an epic, fairly easy to get, or Yannicka, who is farmable within the guild shop. Very accessible team, very easy to work on free to play. As you can see, there's a little bit of damage. Actually, it's a decent amount of damage. a little bit of enhancement and a lot of protection in this faction. Overall, that's one of the reasons this faction is one of the easier ones, especially because Arbiter is such a big carry and somebody you can get for free. So let's take a look at what I use to get by this, and I can tell you a little bit about my team. So here is my team. I used a 3-star Faction Wars. I didn't get a snapshot of it, but it's a pretty solid team. Tyrell has a great aura, helps quite a bit, and obviously gives you so much extra as far as the decreased defense, some damage as well. I have Arbiter, and the rest were 5-star 50s because that's how powerful Arbiter is. Apothecary is great to have. You get the heals, you get the increased speed. Reliquary Tender gives you the cleansing with the additional revive. And I brought Alexander because I just need a little extra damage, and he was already mostly 5-star, mostly built. I just had to throw some gear on him to do some damage, and we were good to go. And took me 10 minutes, 44 seconds. Obviously not particularly fast. I was manualing a lot of it just to make sure everybody stayed alive. So I was probably more cautious than I need to be. This team, for the most part, I was able to run on auto, and it was about a 50-50 chance of killing the boss. It was not going to 3-star the boss unless I manualed it, so I did manual it for that. But it's a good start for a team, and overall carried me pretty far. So hopefully this video has given you some inspiration on what you can do for High Elves. So High Elves is a fairly easy because you get a bunch of free champions, or you can use a bunch of rare champions, and that makes them fairly easy to do. There's a lot of different options. I gave you a pretty basic sample team. Hopefully that gives you something to go on. Until next time, I'm Bront CatHerder.